The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as 10-year-old Prince Adrian walked silently through the grand corridors. His small footsteps made no sound on the polished stone, a skill he had perfected over months of careful practice. The palace buzzed with its usual morning energy, servants hurrying with breakfast trays, gardeners tending to the elaborate flower arrangements, and guards standing at attention at every corner. But Adrian noticed something others missed. He saw how the kitchen maid, Elena, winced when she lifted the heavy silver trays, her arthritis flaring up in the cold morning air. He observed how Guard Captain Morrison's hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking, the weight of his family's financial troubles evident in the dark circles under his eyes. Most of all, he watched Guard Thomas, the youngest member of the royal security team, who stood perfectly still at his post near the library, but whose eyes held a deep sadness that seemed to grow darker each day. The palace staff had grown accustomed to the young prince's quiet presence. Unlike his boisterous older brother, Prince Marcus, who commanded attention wherever he went, Adrian preferred to observe rather than be observed. The adults often forgot he was there, speaking freely about their concerns, their fears, and their struggles. They saw him as just a child too young to understand the complexities of adult life. Guard Thomas had been assigned to the palace for only 6 months, fresh from the military academy with high hopes and a determination to serve the royal family with honor. But something had changed in recent weeks. Adrian noticed how Thomas's shoulders sagged when he thought no one was watching, how he stared out the tall windows with a distant look in his eyes, and how he sometimes pressed his hand to his chest as if trying to calm a racing heart. During his afternoon walks through the palace gardens, Adrian often saw Thomas's wife, Sarah, waiting by the servants' entrance. She would arrive with their 3-year-old daughter, Emma, hoping to catch a glimpse of her husband during his brief break times. Adrian watched from behind the rose bushes as Thomas's face would light up momentarily when he saw his family, only to cloud over again with worry when he had to return to his duties. The young prince had overheard conversations between the senior staff about budget cuts and salary reductions. The kingdom was facing economic challenges, and the palace expenses were being scrutinized carefully. While the royal family would remain comfortable, many of the staff members were struggling to make ends meet. Thomas, being the newest guard, was among those most affected by the reduced wages. One evening, while hiding behind a tapestry in the servants' corridor, Adrian overheard a conversation that made his heart heavy. Thomas was speaking quietly with another guard, his voice filled with desperation. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Marcus," Thomas whispered. "The pay barely covers our rent, and Emma needs new clothes for winter. Sarah's been taking on extra cleaning jobs, but it's not enough. I might have to look for work elsewhere, even though I love serving here." Adrian pressed himself further into the shadows, his small hands clenched into fists. He had never felt so helpless. Here was a good man, dedicated to protecting his family, struggling to provide for the people he loved most. The prince understood more than anyone realized about duty and responsibility, but he also understood something that many adults had forgotten: the power of human kindness. As the days passed, Adrian watched Thomas's situation worsen. The young guard's uniform, once pressed and pristine, began to show signs of wear. His lunch breaks became shorter as he took on additional duties to prove his worth, hoping to secure his position. The worry lines on his face deepened, and Adrian noticed that Thomas had begun losing weight, probably skipping meals to save money for his family. The palace continued its daily routine. Grand dinners were held, visiting dignitaries were welcomed, and life went on as usual for those who lived in comfort. But Adrian couldn't shake the image of little Emma, Thomas's daughter, playing with a worn-out doll while her father stood guard, sacrificing his own well-being for a job that barely sustained his family. Late one night, as Adrian lay in his luxurious bed surrounded by more toys and books than he could ever use, he made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't stand by and watch a good man suffer in silence while he lived in such abundance. The 10-year-old prince began to formulate a plan, one that would require all of his courage and the silent strength he had been developing throughout his young life. The next morning, Adrian woke with a new determination. He dressed carefully, choosing his simplest clothes, and made his way to the palace vaults where his personal allowance and gifts were stored. He had never paid much attention to the expensive presents he received from visiting dignitaries and family friends, but now he saw them differently. Each golden toy, each precious gem, each elaborate gadget represented an opportunity to help someone who truly needed it. As the palace stirred to life around him, Prince Adrian began the first step of his plan, unaware that his actions would soon shake the very foundations of the royal household and change the life of Guard Thomas forever. Adrian's plan began with careful observation and meticulous timing. He had spent weeks studying the palace routines, noting when each area was most and least occupied. The treasury room, where his personal belongings and allowances were stored, was guarded but accessible during certain hours when the guards rotated shifts. The young prince knew he had a narrow window of opportunity each day during the afternoon changing of the guard. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Adrian approached Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for over 30 years. She was organizing linens in the supply room when the prince appeared silently beside her, causing her to jump slightly. "Your Highness, you startled me," she said, placing a hand over her heart. "What can I do for you today?" Adrian looked up at her with his serious brown eyes. "Mrs. Pemberton, I've been thinking about the families who work here. Do they have everything they need?" The elderly woman paused in her folding, surprised by the question. Most royal children rarely showed interest in the staff's personal lives. "Well, Your Highness, everyone is grateful for their positions here. Times are a bit challenging for some, but we manage. What about Guard Thomas? Does his little girl have warm clothes for winter?" Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened. She had noticed the young guard's struggles and had even considered offering help from her own modest savings. "Emma is a sweet child, Your Highness. Her father works very hard to provide for her." Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "I see." He paused for a moment, then added, "If someone wanted to help families like theirs, how would they do it without making anyone feel embarrassed?" The question caught Mrs. Pemberton off guard. She knelt down to Adrian's eye level, studying his earnest face. "Your Highness, that's a very thoughtful question. Sometimes the most helpful gifts are the ones that come anonymously, allowing people to keep their dignity while receiving assistance." Adrian absorbed this information carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton, you've been very helpful." That afternoon, during the guard rotation period Adrian had been studying, he made his move. He slipped into the treasury room where his personal vault was located. The room was filled with countless gifts from world leaders, ceremonial items, and boxes of valuables that had accumulated over his young life. Adrian had never paid much attention to these possessions before, but now he saw them as tools for helping others. He carefully selected several items: a golden music box from the ambassador of Venetia, a set of precious gem-encrusted toy soldiers from the Duke of Marlborough, and an ornate silver picture frame embedded with sapphires. These were items he had never played with, gifts that had been presented with great fanfare but ultimately forgotten in the vastness of his collection. Adrian wrapped each item carefully in soft cloth and placed them in a simple cloth bag. His heart raced with nervous excitement as he made his way through the palace corridors, avoiding the main pathways where he might encounter his tutors or parents. He had approximately 20 minutes before his afternoon history lesson, enough time to execute the next phase of his plan. The prince made his way to the servants' quarters, an area of the palace he rarely visited, but had explored during his quiet observations. He knew that Thomas lived in a small apartment with his wife and daughter just outside the palace grounds, but Sarah often visited the servants' area to collect Thomas's laundered uniforms and deliver his lunch when finances were too tight for the palace cafeteria. Adrian found the small message board where staff members left notes for each other. He had prepared a simple message in his careful handwriting. "For the Thomas family, from a friend who appreciates Guard Thomas's dedicated service. Please accept these gifts for little Emma with no questions asked." He placed the bag of carefully selected items beneath the message board, arranging them so they would be easily noticed but not immediately obvious to passers-by. His hands trembled slightly as he secured the note to the bag. This was the most daring thing he had ever done, and the weight of his actions felt enormous for someone so young. As footsteps approached in the corridor, Adrian quickly hid behind a large laundry cart. Mrs. Henderson, one of the kitchen staff, appeared and noticed the bag immediately. She read the note twice, looked around cautiously, then carefully lifted the bag. Adrian watched as her eyes widened when she peered inside and saw the valuable items. "My goodness," she whispered to herself. She looked around again, then hurried toward the main servants' area, presumably to find someone in authority to report the discovery. Adrian's heart pounded as he made his way back to his chambers. He had set something in motion, but he wasn't sure how it would unfold. Would the items reach Thomas's family? Would anyone suspect the young prince's involvement? Most importantly, would his gesture actually help ease the burden that he had seen weighing so heavily on the dedicated guard's shoulders? That evening at dinner, Adrian sat quietly at the grand dining table with his parents and brother, picking at his elaborate meal while his mind raced with thoughts of his secret mission. His father, King William, discussed trade negotiations with visiting ambassadors, while his mother, Queen Isabella, planned the upcoming charity gala. His brother Marcus complained about his riding instructor's strict requirements. Adrian listened to the conversation swirling around him, but his attention was focused on wondering whether his gift had reached its intended recipients. He thought about little Emma, and whether she would soon have warm clothes for the approaching winter. He pictured Guard Thomas's face, hoping that some small burden might be lifted from the man's shoulders. As the evening progressed, Adrian felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety about what he had done. He had taken his first real step toward using his privileged position to help someone in need, but he also realized that this was just the beginning. One gesture, no matter how well-intentioned, couldn't solve all of Thomas's family's problems. That night, as the palace settled into its nighttime quiet, Adrian lay in his bed planning his next move. He had learned that helping others required not just good intentions but careful thought, discretion, and sustained effort. The young prince was beginning to understand that his silent strength could be a powerful force for good, but only if he used it wisely and consistently. The next morning brought unexpected drama to the palace. Adrian was practicing his violin in the music room when he heard hurried footsteps and urgent whispers in the corridor outside. Through the partially open door, he could see Mrs. Pemberton speaking in hushed tones with Captain Morrison, both looking concerned and puzzled. "The items are definitely valuable, Captain," Mrs. Pemberton was saying. "Genuine gold and precious stones. But who would leave such expensive gifts anonymously? And how did they know about the Thomas family's situation?" Captain Morrison frowned deeply. "This is highly irregular. We need to investigate this thoroughly. Someone with access to valuable items has been moving through the palace without authorization. This could be a security concern." Adrian's stomach dropped. He hadn't considered that his act of kindness might be viewed as a security threat. He set down his violin and moved closer to the door, straining to hear more of their conversation. "Should we question the staff?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. "Everyone will need to be interviewed," Captain Morrison replied grimly. "We can't have unauthorized distribution of valuable items, regardless of the good intentions. The royal family's security depends on knowing exactly who has access to what." As their voices faded down the corridor, Adrian realized he had created a much bigger situation than he had anticipated. His simple desire to help had now put the entire palace staff under suspicion. Worse, it might even put Guard Thomas in an uncomfortable position if people thought he was somehow involved in the mysterious gift-giving. Despite his growing anxiety, Adrian couldn't help but feel curious about whether his gift had actually reached Emma. During his afternoon walk through the gardens, he took a route that led him near the servants' entrance where Sarah Thomas often waited with her daughter. His heart leaped when he saw little Emma playing nearby, wearing a beautiful new winter coat that sparkled subtly in the sunlight. The coat was clearly made from fabric far finer than anything the family could normally afford. Sarah Thomas sat on a bench nearby, holding what appeared to be the ornate silver picture frame Adrian had included in his gift bag. She was examining it with a mixture of wonder and concern, turning it over in her hands as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Mama, look how pretty my coat is," Emma called out, spinning around to make the coat's fabric shimmer. "The nice lady said it was made from a magical music box." Adrian smiled despite his worries. Mrs. Henderson must have sold the golden music box and used the money to buy Emma appropriate winter clothing. While keeping the picture frame as something the family could treasure, it was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture he had hoped for. But his joy was short-lived. As he watched the scene, he noticed Guard Thomas approaching with heavy steps and a troubled expression. When Thomas reached his family, he knelt down to Emma's level and spoke quietly to Sarah. "Sarah, we need to talk about these gifts," he said softly. "Captain Morrison has launched an investigation. Someone is going to ask us questions about how we received these items." Sarah's face paled. "Thomas, I swear we don't know where they came from. Mrs. Henderson just said someone left them for Emma and we thought—" "I know, love. I believe you. But this puts me in a difficult position at work. Some people might think I'm involved in something improper." Adrian watched as Thomas's shoulders sagged even further. Instead of bringing relief, his gift had created new stress for the very family he was trying to help. The young prince felt a crushing weight of guilt and realized that good intentions alone weren't enough. He needed to be much more careful about how he helped others. That evening, Adrian couldn't concentrate on his dinner or his bedtime reading. He lay awake thinking about the investigation and how his actions had complicated Guard Thomas's already difficult situation. He needed to find a way to help without creating more problems, but he wasn't sure how. The next day brought more challenges. During his morning lessons, Adrian overheard his tutor, Professor Williams, speaking with another staff member about the mysterious gift incident. "The whole palace is buzzing about it," Professor Williams was saying. "Captain Morrison has interviewed half the staff already. Everyone's nervous because nobody knows who has access to such valuable items or why they would give them away anonymously." Adrian tried to focus on his mathematics problems, but his mind kept wandering to the growing investigation. He realized he needed to be much more strategic if he wanted to continue helping people without causing chaos in the palace. During his afternoon break, Adrian made a decision that required tremendous courage for a 10-year-old boy. He sought out Mrs. Pemberton, finding her in her office reviewing staff schedules. "Mrs. Pemberton," he said quietly, "may I speak with you privately about something important?" The elderly housekeeper looked up from her papers, noting the serious expression on the young prince's face. "Of course, Your Highness. What's troubling you?" Adrian took a deep breath. "Yesterday you told me about helping people anonymously so they could keep their dignity. What if someone wanted to help, but accidentally caused problems instead?" Mrs. Pemberton studied his face carefully. "Your Highness, are you asking hypothetically, or is there something specific you need to discuss?" The prince hesitated for a long moment, then made a choice that would change everything. "Mrs. Pemberton, I need to tell you something very important, and I need your help to fix a problem I created." Her eyes widened slightly as she began to understand the implications of his words. "Your Highness, please sit down and tell me exactly what's happened." Adrian sat in the chair across from her desk, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. "I was the one who left the gifts for Emma Thomas. I took items from my personal vault because I saw how worried Guard Thomas has been about providing for his family. But now Captain Morrison is investigating everyone, and I've made things worse instead of better." Mrs. Pemberton's expression shifted from surprise to understanding to something like admiration. "Your Highness," she said gently, "you acted with a very kind heart. But you're right that the situation has become complicated. Can you help me fix this without getting Guard Thomas in trouble?" Adrian asked earnestly. "He's a good man and his family needed help. I just didn't know how to give it properly." Mrs. Pemberton leaned back in her chair, thinking carefully. "Your Highness, this will require some delicate handling, but I believe we can find a solution that helps the Thomas family while also ending the investigation. However, you'll need to trust me and follow my guidance exactly." Adrian nodded eagerly. "I'll do whatever you think is best. I just want to help people without causing problems." As Mrs. Pemberton began to outline a plan that could resolve the situation, Adrian realized he was learning one of life's most important lessons. True kindness required not just a generous heart, but also wisdom, planning, and sometimes the courage to seek help from others. Mrs. Pemberton's plan was both simple and brilliant. The next morning, she requested a private meeting with Captain Morrison, bringing Adrian along as a witness to an important discovery she had made. "Captain Morrison," she began formally, "Prince Adrian has brought something to my attention that I believe will resolve our investigation." The captain straightened to attention when he saw the young prince enter with, "Mrs. Pemberton, Your Highness." "Mrs. Pemberton, how can I assist you?" Adrian stepped forward, his heart beating rapidly but his voice steady. "Captain Morrison, I need to tell you about something I discovered in the palace storage rooms." Mrs. Pemberton had coached him carefully on how to present the situation truthfully while protecting everyone involved. Adrian continued, While exploring the palace yesterday, I found that some items from my personal collection had been moved from my vault. When I investigated further, I learned they had been given to families in need. Captain Morrison's brow furrowed. Your Highness, are you saying someone took items from your personal vault without permission? Not exactly, Adrian said carefully. I believe someone with access to the vaults noticed that I had many unused gifts and decided to share them with palace families who needed help. I think this person was trying to do something kind but didn't realize it would cause concern. Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward. Captain, I've spoken with Prince Adrian about this situation. He has expressed that he would like to formally donate those particular items to families in need. Since they were his personal possessions, this would make the entire matter a legitimate royal charity gesture, rather than an unauthorized distribution. The captain looked confused but relieved. So this is an official donation from Prince Adrian's personal collection? Yes, Adrian said firmly. I want to make sure the Thomas family and any other families who receive these gifts know they can keep them with my blessing. They were gifts I wasn't using, and I'm happy they can help people who need them more than I do. Captain Morrison's expression softened considerably. Your Highness, that's very generous of you. This completely changes the nature of our investigation. If you're officially donating these items to palace families, then there's no security concern to investigate. Exactly, Mrs. Pemberton confirmed. We simply had some confusion about the proper documentation. Prince Adrian and I will ensure that any future charitable distributions follow proper palace protocols. After Captain Morrison left, clearly relieved to close the investigation, Mrs. Pemberton sat down with Adrian to discuss a more sustainable approach to helping palace families. Your Highness, she said kindly, your heart is in exactly the right place, but we need to create a system that allows you to help people without causing confusion or putting anyone in uncomfortable positions. Adrian nodded eagerly. I want to do this the right way. I just didn't know how. Mrs. Pemberton smiled. What if we established a small, discreet fund to help palace staff members who are going through difficult times? You could contribute items from your collection or part of your allowance, and I could ensure the assistance reaches families who need it most, in ways that preserve their dignity. Like a secret helping program? Adrian asked, his eyes brightening. Exactly, but properly organized and documented, so there are no more security concerns or investigations. Over the following weeks, Adrian and Mrs. Pemberton worked together to create what they called the Palace Family Support Initiative. Adrian contributed regularly from his allowance and occasionally donated unused gifts from his collection. Mrs. Pemberton used her knowledge of the staff families to identify those who needed assistance and found tactful ways to provide help for Guard Thomas's family. They arranged for Sarah to receive a part-time position helping with palace correspondence, which provided additional income without making Thomas feel like he was accepting charity. They also ensured that Emma received educational materials and appropriate clothing through what appeared to be standard palace family benefits. Adrian learned to observe even more carefully, not just to identify problems but to understand the best ways to address them. He discovered that Mrs. Chen, one of the kitchen staff, was struggling to pay for her son's medical treatments. Instead of direct financial assistance, they arranged for the boy to receive care from the royal physician as part of an expanded palace family health program. When Old Master Johnson, the palace librarian, was worried about retiring because he couldn't afford to live on his pension, they created a library emeritus position that allowed him to work reduced hours while maintaining his full salary and dignity. The young prince began to understand that effective helping required creativity, sensitivity, and long-term thinking. It wasn't enough to simply give people money or gifts. True assistance meant understanding what people really needed and finding ways to provide it that enhanced rather than diminished their sense of self-worth. 3 weeks after the investigation ended, Adrian was walking through the palace gardens when he encountered Guard Thomas at his post near the library. The guard looked markedly different. His uniform was pressed, his posture was straighter, and most importantly, the deep worry lines around his eyes had begun to fade. Good afternoon. Your Highness, Thomas said with a genuine smile as Adrian approached. Good afternoon, Guard Thomas. How is your family doing? Very well, thank you for asking, Your Highness. My wife has been helping Mrs. Pemberton with some administrative work, and it's made a real difference for us. Emma is excited about the book she received from the Palace Library program. Adrian felt a warm glow of satisfaction, but he was also learning the importance of humility. "I'm glad to hear that. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned that you're one of our most dedicated guards. I appreciate that, Your Highness. It means a great deal to know that the royal family notices and values our service." As Adrian continued his walk, he reflected on how much he had learned in just a few weeks. He had discovered that his position as a prince came with not just privileges but opportunities to make a real difference in people's lives. More importantly, he had learned that effective kindness required wisdom, planning, and the guidance of experienced people like Mrs. Pemberton. That evening, as he prepared for bed, Adrian felt a deep sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. He was beginning to understand what it truly meant to serve others, and he realized that his silent strength could be a force for good if he continued to develop it, thoughtfully and responsibly. The palace around him felt different now, not just a grand building where he lived, but a community of people whose lives were interconnected, and where his actions could ripple outward to create positive change for families like the Thomases, who worked so hard to serve the royal household. Word of the palace's improved morale began to spread, though no one outside of Mrs. Pemberton knew the true source. King William mentioned during a family dinner how impressed he was with the dedication and enthusiasm he was seeing among the staff. Captain Morrison reported that workplace satisfaction has increased significantly this quarter, the king said, cutting into his roasted duck. Several guards have requested extended assignments here, and we've had fewer sick days among the household staff. Queen Isabella smiled. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned that several of the staff families seem to be doing much better lately. She said it's wonderful to see children like little Emma Thomas running around in proper winter clothes. Adrian kept his expression neutral, though inside he felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. His brother Marcus, however, was more interested in complaining about his upcoming diplomatic lessons than listening to discussions about staff welfare. "I don't see why I need to learn about trade agreements," Marcus grumbled. "When I'm king, I'll have advisors to handle all that boring stuff." Their father frowned slightly. "Marcus, understanding how your kingdom functions and caring about the people who serve it is fundamental to good leadership. A king who doesn't understand his people cannot serve them effectively." Adrian absorbed these words carefully, feeling more certain than ever that his work with Mrs. Pemberton was teaching him valuable lessons about true leadership. But their success was about to face its biggest test yet. 3 days later, Mrs. Pemberton approached Adrian with a grave expression during his afternoon study break. "Your Highness, we have a situation that requires careful consideration," she said quietly. "Young David Chen, the kitchen assistant's son whom we've been helping with medical care, has been diagnosed with a serious condition that requires surgery. The procedure is expensive and specialized, beyond what our current support system can manage." Adrian felt his heart sink. David was only 12 years old, just 2 years older than Adrian himself. The boy's mother, Mrs. Chen, had been working extra shifts in the kitchen to save money for his treatment, often staying late into the evening to clean and prepare for the next day's meals. "What kind of surgery does he need?" Adrian asked. "It's a heart condition that requires a specialist in the capital city. The surgery itself costs more than Mrs. Chen makes in an entire year, and that doesn't include travel and recovery expenses." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, thinking hard. "Mrs. Pemberton, how much money do we have in our support fund? Even if we used everything we've saved, it would only cover about a quarter of the total cost." That evening, Adrian lay in bed staring at the ornate ceiling of his bedroom, thinking about David Chen and his mother's quiet desperation. He had grown close to Mrs. Chen over the past weeks, often stopping by the kitchen to check on her well-being. She always had a kind word and a warm smile, despite her worries about her son. Adrian realized that this situation required him to step beyond the comfortable anonymity he had maintained so far. Helping with small needs through Mrs. Pemberton was one thing, but David's life-threatening condition demanded more direct action. The next morning, Adrian requested a formal meeting with his parents. King William and Queen Isabella were surprised by their younger son's serious demeanor as he entered their private study. "Father, Mother, I need to discuss something important with you," Adrian began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Of course, dear," Queen Isabella said, setting down her correspondence. "What's on your mind?" Adrian took a deep breath. I've learned that Mrs. Chen's son David needs emergency heart surgery. The family cannot afford the treatment, and I would like to use my personal funds to help pay for it." His parents exchanged surprised glances. King William leaned forward in his chair. "Adrian, that's a very compassionate request. How did you learn about young David's situation?" "I've been paying attention to the people who work for our family," Adrian said simply. "Mrs. Chen has been working extra hours trying to save money for David's medical care. I think we should help her." Queen Isabella's expression softened. "Adrian, it's wonderful that you're aware of our staff's challenges, but using your personal funds for such a large expense is a significant decision." "I understand that, Mother. But I have more money than I can ever use, and David might die without this surgery. It seems wrong to have so much when a family in our own palace is facing such a crisis." King William studied his younger son with new interest. He had always known Adrian was thoughtful and observant, but this level of awareness and compassion surprised him. "How much money are we discussing?" the king asked. Adrian had prepared for this question. "The total cost would be about half of my annual allowance. I could also contribute some valuable items from my collection if needed." Queen Isabella looked touched by her son's earnestness. "Adrian, your generosity is admirable, but we need to consider the broader implications. If we help the Chen family, other staff members might expect similar assistance for their medical needs. Then maybe we should create a formal program to help with medical emergencies," Adrian suggested. "We could establish a palace medical fund that helps families when they face serious health crises." His parents looked at each other with amazement. King William stood up and walked to the window, thinking carefully. "Adrian," he said finally, "you've shown remarkable maturity and compassion. If you're truly committed to helping David, your mother and I will support your decision. Furthermore, your suggestion about a medical assistance program has merit." "You mean we can help David?" Adrian asked hopefully. "Yes," Queen Isabella said, "but we're going to do this properly. We'll establish an official palace medical assistance fund, with your contribution as the founding donation. This way, we can help David while also creating a sustainable way to assist other families who face similar crises." Adrian felt overwhelming relief and joy, but King William wasn't finished. "However," the king continued, "I want you to understand that this kind of generosity comes with responsibility. You'll need to be involved in overseeing how this fund is managed and distributed. Are you prepared for that commitment?" "Yes, Father," Adrian said without hesitation. "I want to learn how to help people effectively." As his parents began discussing the logistics of establishing the medical fund, Adrian realized that his silent strength was evolving into something more visible and official. He was no longer just observing and helping secretly. He was taking on real responsibility for the welfare of others. That afternoon, when Mrs. Pemberton heard about the successful meeting, she smiled with pride. "Your Highness, you've just taken a very important step in your development as a leader. You found the courage to advocate for someone who needed help, even when it required stepping out of your comfort zone." Adrian nodded, feeling both excited and slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility he had taken on. "Mrs. Pemberton, do you think David will be okay?" "I believe he will, Your Highness. And I believe this experience will help many other families in the future. You've learned to use your voice as well as your silent strength." As the palace buzzed with quiet preparations for David's surgery and the establishment of the new medical fund, Adrian understood that he had crossed an important threshold. He was no longer just a prince who helped in secret. He was becoming a prince who took public responsibility for the welfare of others, and that transformation would shape everything that followed. The day of David Chen's surgery was tense for everyone in the palace. Adrian found it difficult to concentrate on his lessons, checking the clock constantly and wondering how the procedure was progressing in the capital city. Mrs. Chen had been given leave to accompany her son, along with travel expenses covered by the newly established medical fund. Mrs. Pemberton found Adrian in the library that afternoon, staring out the window instead of reading his assigned history text. "Your Highness," she said gently, "Mrs. Chen called from the hospital. David's surgery was successful. The doctors say he should make a full recovery." Adrian felt such overwhelming relief that tears sprang to his eyes. "Really, he's going to be okay?" "Yes, dear. The specialist said the surgery went even better than expected. David will need to rest for several weeks, but he should be able to return to normal activities soon." That evening at dinner, King William shared the good news with the family. The Chen boy's surgery was successful, he announced. Dr. Whitmore, the cardiac specialist, said it was one of the most straightforward procedures he's performed this year. That's wonderful news, Queen Isabella said. Mrs. Chen must be so relieved. Marcus looked up from his meal with mild interest. Who's David Chen? The son of one of our kitchen staff, their father explained. He needed emergency heart surgery. Adrian advocated for the family and contributed his own funds to help with the medical expenses. Marcus stared at his younger brother with surprise. You gave away your own money? Adrian nodded quietly. David needed help. But why didn't you just ask father to pay for it from the royal treasury? King William answered before Adrian could respond. Because Marcus, Adrian recognized a need and took personal responsibility for addressing it. That's what true leadership looks like. Marcus seemed to consider this, studying his brother with new curiosity. How did you even know about the kid's problem? I pay attention to the people who work here, Adrian said simply. They're part of our family too. Over the following days, word of David's successful surgery and Adrian's role in helping the family spread throughout the palace. The staff's attitude toward the young prince shifted noticeably. Where once they had seen him as a quiet, somewhat invisible child, they now looked at him with respect and gratitude. Guard Thomas approached Adrian during one of his garden walks. Your Highness, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for the Chen family. It means more than you know to see that the royal family cares about us as individuals. We're all part of the same community, Adrian replied. When one family faces a crisis, it affects all of us, Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Your Highness, if I may say so, you're going to make an excellent leader someday. But Adrian's growing reputation for compassion brought unexpected challenges. Word reached beyond the palace walls, and soon the royal family began receiving requests for assistance from families throughout the kingdom. People heard about the medical fund and assumed it was available to anyone in need. King William called Adrian into his study to discuss the situation. Adrian, we have a problem. The palace is receiving dozens of letters each day from families requesting medical assistance. The fund you established was intended for palace staff, but people throughout the kingdom are asking for help. Adrian felt overwhelmed. I didn't think about that happening. What should we do? This is exactly why leadership requires careful consideration of consequences, his father said, though not unkindly. When you're in a position of authority, your actions can have effects far beyond what you initially intended. Are you saying I shouldn't have helped David? Not at all. You did the right thing. But now we need to think about how to manage the broader implications responsibly. Queen Isabella joined the conversation, carrying a stack of letters. Adrian, these are just from this morning's mail. Families with sick children, elderly people who need care, parents who can't afford medicine. Each story is heartbreaking. Adrian looked at the letters with growing anxiety. I wanted to help people, but I can't help everyone in the entire kingdom. That's precisely the lesson you're learning, King William said. Effective leadership means understanding your limits and creating sustainable systems for help. You can't solve every problem personally, but you can work to create structures that address widespread needs. Over the next week, Adrian worked with his parents and Mrs. Pemberton to develop a response to the overwhelming requests for assistance. They created a formal application process for the Palace Medical Fund, limiting it to current staff members, but also establishing partnerships with charitable organizations throughout the kingdom to help direct other families to appropriate resources. Adrian also began writing personal responses to some of the letters, explaining the fund's limitations but offering encouragement and information about other sources of help. This task taught him another important lesson about leadership. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer people is acknowledgement and dignity, even when you can't solve their problems. Meanwhile, Marcus had been watching his brother's activities with growing interest. One afternoon, he found Adrian in his room, carefully writing responses to aid requests.
Can I ask you something?
Marcus said, sitting on the edge of Adrian's bed. Adrian looked up from his writing. Of course. Why do you care so much about other people's problems? I mean, we have everything we need. Why not just enjoy it? Adrian set down his pen and considered the question seriously. Do you remember when you were 7 and you broke your arm falling from your horse? Yeah, it hurt terribly. Do you remember how everyone in the palace, the doctor, Mrs. Pemberton, even the guards, all rushed to help you? How worried and caring everyone was. Marcus nodded. Well, imagine if instead of helping you, everyone had just said, that's not our problem. and walked away. How would that have felt? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Awful. Scary. That's how Mrs. Chen felt when David was sick and how Guard Thomas feels when he can't provide for his family. They're part of our palace family, but they don't have the resources we do. If we don't help them when they're scared and in need, who will? Marcus looked thoughtful. I never really thought about it that way. Most people don't, Adrian said gently. But once you start paying attention, you realize how much difference we can make in other people's lives. Could I help too? Marcus asked tentatively. With the fund or the letters or something? Adrian smiled, the first truly happy smile he'd had in days. I'd like that. Mrs. Pemberton has been teaching me about organizing charitable work. I could teach you what I've learned. As the brothers began working together on responses to aid requests, Adrian realized that his silent strength had accomplished something he hadn't expected. It had inspired others to care about helping people too. Even more importantly, he was learning that leadership wasn't about having all the answers or solving every problem personally. It was about inspiring others to join in the work of making their community better. That evening, as he prepared for bed, Adrian reflected on how much his life had changed since he first noticed Guard Thomas's worried expression. He had started with a simple desire to help one family, and now he was learning to be a leader who could inspire others to care about their community's well-being. The most surprising discovery was that his silent strength had never really been about staying quiet. It had been about observing carefully, thinking deeply, and then finding the courage to act with wisdom and compassion. 6 months after David Chen's successful surgery, the palace had transformed into a community that truly cared for its members. The Medical Assistance Fund had helped 3 more families. The Palace Family Support Initiative had discreetly aided dozens of staff members, and the atmosphere throughout the royal household had shifted from formal efficiency to genuine mutual support. Adrian, now 11 years old, had grown not just in age but in wisdom and confidence. His silent strength had evolved into something more powerful, the ability to lead through example and inspire others to care. His morning walks through the palace were no longer solitary observations, but opportunities to check on people he had come to know as individuals, rather than just staff members. On a crisp spring morning, Adrian was reading in the garden when Captain Morrison approached with an unusual expression, part formal, part emotional. Your Highness, may I speak with you about an important matter? Adrian set down his book. Of course, Captain Morrison. I've received some news that I wanted to share with you personally. Guard Thomas has been offered a promotion to Deputy Captain of the Royal Guard in the neighboring Kingdom of Aldermere. It's a significant advancement with much higher pay and excellent benefits for his family. Adrian felt a mixture of happiness and sadness. That's wonderful for Guard Thomas. He deserves recognition for his dedication. Yes, he does. But here's what I think you should know, Your Highness. Thomas came to me yesterday to discuss the offer. He said he wanted to decline it. Decline it? But why? Captain Morrison smiled slightly. He said that over the past months he's come to understand what it means to be part of a royal household that truly values its people. He told me he's never felt more respected or appreciated in his life, and he doesn't want to leave a place where his family is genuinely cared for. Adrian was quiet for a moment, absorbing the significance of Thomas's decision. What did you tell him? I told him that his loyalty to our palace was admirable, but that he owed it to his family to consider what was best for their future. The position in Aldermere would provide financial security he could never achieve here, despite all our improvements. So he's going to accept it? Actually, Your Highness, that's where you come in. Your father and I have been discussing Thomas's situation, and we've decided to offer him a promotion to assistant captain here, with a salary that matches what Aldermere offered. We want him to know that his dedication and excellence are recognized and rewarded right here at home. Adrian felt a surge of joy. Really, you're promoting Guard Thomas? We are. And Your Highness, I want you to know that this decision was influenced by your example. You showed us the importance of really seeing our people as individuals and investing in their well-being. Thomas isn't just getting promoted because he received an outside offer. He's getting promoted because you helped us recognize his value as a person and a professional. That afternoon, Adrian watched from the library window as Captain Morrison delivered the news to Guard Thomas. Even from a distance, he could see the transformation in Thomas's posture. The straightening of his shoulders, the smile that lit up his face, and the way he shook Morrison's hand with obvious gratitude and pride. Later that evening, during the family dinner, King William shared another piece of news that surprised everyone. "I've received a letter from King Frederick of Westmarch," he announced. "He's heard about our staff support initiatives and wants to implement similar programs in his own palace. He's particularly interested in our medical assistance fund." Queen Isabella looked pleased. How wonderful that our efforts are inspiring other royal households. Marcus, who had become increasingly involved in the charitable work, looked excited. "Does this mean other kingdoms might start helping their staff families too?" "It appears so," their father replied. "Adrian, your initial act of kindness toward the Chen family has had far-reaching consequences." Adrian felt a deep sense of satisfaction but also humility. "I just wanted to help one family. I never imagined it would spread to other kingdoms." "That's often how real change begins," King William said thoughtfully. "One person sees a need and acts with courage and compassion. Others observe, learn, and are inspired to do the same." 3 weeks later, the palace hosted a small celebration to recognize David Chen's complete recovery and to formally announce Guard Thomas's promotion. Adrian stood with his family as they addressed the assembled staff members in the Great Hall. Mrs. Chen, looking healthier and happier than she had in months, spoke briefly about her gratitude to the royal family and to everyone who had supported her family during David's illness. David himself, looking robust and energetic, shyly thanked everyone for their kindness. Guard Thomas, now Assistant Captain Thomas, spoke about his decision to remain at the palace despite attractive offers elsewhere. "This royal household has shown me what it means to be valued not just as an employee, but as a family member," he said. "My wife Sarah and daughter Emma and I are proud to continue serving here." After the formal ceremony, Adrian found himself surrounded by staff members who wanted to thank him personally. But the moment that meant the most came when little Emma Thomas approached him with a handmade drawing. "Prince Adrian," she said shyly, "I made this for you." The drawing showed a palace with many people inside, all smiling and holding hands. At the bottom, in carefully printed letters, it said, "Thank you for caring about families like mine." Adrian knelt down to Emma's level. "This is beautiful, Emma. Thank you for making it for me." "My daddy says you have a special kind of strength that helps people," she said seriously. "He says it's the best kind of strength a prince can have." As the celebration continued around them, Adrian reflected on Emma's words. His silent strength had indeed evolved into something powerful. Not the kind of strength that commanded through force or fear, but the kind that led through compassion, understanding, and genuine care for others. Mrs. Pemberton approached him as the evening wound down. "Your Highness, I have something I've been wanting to tell you." "What's that, Mrs. Pemberton?" "When you first came to me months ago asking about helping people anonymously, I thought you were just a kind-hearted child with good intentions. I never imagined you would develop into the thoughtful leader you've become." "I had a very good teacher," Adrian replied. "You showed me how to help people effectively and with dignity." "No, Your Highness. I showed you some techniques, but the wisdom to use them well, that came from your own character. You've learned to balance compassion with responsibility, kindness with sustainability, and personal caring with effective leadership." As the palace settled into its nighttime quiet, Adrian walked through the familiar corridors one more time before bed. The building looked the same as it had months ago, but everything had changed. The staff moved with lighter steps, families felt secure and valued, and a community had been built based on mutual care and respect. Guard Thomas, now Assistant Captain Thomas, stood at his post near the main entrance, looking dignified and confident in his new role. When he saw Adrian, he straightened to attention and smiled. "Good evening, Your Highness." "Good evening, Assistant Captain Thomas. How does your new position feel?" "Like coming home, Your Highness. Like finally being exactly where I belong." As Adrian made his way to his chambers, he understood that his silent strength had accomplished something far greater than he had ever imagined. He hadn't just helped individual families or solved specific problems. He had helped create a culture where people mattered, where kindness was valued, and where everyone could contribute to making their community better. The 10-year-old prince, who had first noticed Guard Thomas's worried expression, had grown into a young leader who understood that true strength came not from power or privilege, but from the courage to care deeply about others and the wisdom to act on that caring effectively. And in the transformed palace around him, dozens of families slept peacefully, knowing they were valued, supported, and cared for by a royal household that had learned to see them not as servants, but as the essential, cherished members of an extended family that they truly were.